The proposition has reached a point of telling us that formal education stuns innovation, it stokes risk awareness, and it sounds intimidating. It provides us, it alienates us from conforming to a system. The opposition has been telling us that you have to be within a system to understand that you want to deviate from it. You have to first see the system before you decide you want to be non-conformist from that system. In other words, we've really reached a stage in this debate where we're saying, should we stay inside the classroom to listen to a teacher who may not necessarily be imparting much knowledge that we don't know? Or is it better to stay outside the classroom and try and gain that same knowledge through experience out of the classroom? Do you need percentages for attending classes? Do percentages in education match up to the percentages of attendance in classes? Do percentages of success in life marry up to the percentage of attendance in classes? Taking us further forward and speaking in favor of the motion from West Bengal NUJS, Ananda Kumar.
Mr. Speaker, when my exams ended last month, I tore my question papers. And I'm saying this right now because my teachers are not present, so that's fine. So I tore them. So what does that say about me? What it says about me is that and I got pretty decent marks, by the way. The only reason that happened was because I studied a lot for my exams, but I did not care about it. I will never use whatever I studied in my exams in the future because it's not something that I'm practically interested in. And I'm going through the grind just because my parents and my society has told me that I need to do that to be a successful person. And that is something which is highly problematic with this education system, that it asks you to conform. Another thing happens because of that, right? So the time that you would be spending maybe coding, and so this side of the house has confused apprenticeship, which we are all for, with education. Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs could have learned coding with like a friend or a teacher who specialized in coding without learning about chemistry or without learning about English or without learning about Galileo and like his weird things that he did with cannonballs and all, right? Mr. Speaker, that is exactly my point. Yes, education does give you some things, but there are ways to go about it by like avoiding every single bad thing which is there with this education. Now moving on to what is bad with it. Mr. Speaker, today's education has become about relative excellence, whereas entrepreneurship is about absolute potential fulfillment. What do I mean by that? My parents judge me and my society judges me, and my success is measured in this society by not how much I can do, by if I am doing my best or not, but how I am doing relative to the other people in my class. My parents do not care if I am doing the best I can at debating, but they do care if I am not coming at the top of my class. Mr. Speaker, when success is measured relatively, that is where entrepreneurship goes. And especially in this kind of a formal education setup, where it is mandatory for you to study some things which you might not naturally be good at, but you still have to for the purpose of getting marks. And that is how your success is measured. Mr. Speaker, this breeds mediocrity. What do I mean by that? So in this present education system, just to be like good in the eyes of my parents and in the eyes of my friends and to be praised by rest of the world, I will not care about my passions. I will not care about that brilliant idea which is in my head and which might change the world tomorrow. But I will care if I'm able to get decent marks in things which I don't like at all. And that is something, Mr. Speaker, in the present education system that we have a problem with. Coming to the whole idea of conformity and suppression of passion. Mr. Speaker, in entrepreneurship and in education, the contrast is that in education, We are rewarded for coloring within the lines, Mr. Speaker, but in entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur needs to create a new picture of his own which has never been created before so that others can color in that.
Speaking against the motion from Loreto College, Deepanjana Roy.
We are a generation that has mastered the art of blaming other things in order to shirk responsibility. For example, Europe blames America for creating the global recession. America blames China for being a major polluter. China blames India for being an external aggressor. India quite obviously blames Great Britain for everything that is wrong with it. You see, we are so used to holding something else accountable to escape our guilt that it has come to a point where it does not even matter what we are blaming, whether that's the right thing to blame or not. Today's motion is exactly along those lines. It makes the mistake of blaming education for the supposed death of entrepreneurship. Before making a statement as dramatic as education kills entrepreneurship, it is important to know what these ideas stand for. Education is not just learning confined to the classroom. I'm sorry, the proposition has got it wrong. Education is learning as a whole. And the one thing we know that is common to all entrepreneurs is that they're always willing to learn. It is this willingness to learn that makes them take up new challenges. They may learn by doing, they may learn by reading, but they want to learn. Just because some successful entrepreneurs are not highly educated, that does not necessarily imply that a highly educated person can't be a successful entrepreneur. To be educated is to know that there is a risk involved. To be an entrepreneur is to have the courage to take that risk. Yes, Bill Gates dropped out of college, and yes, it worked out for him very well. But for every Bill Gates, there are thousands of people who dropped out of college and regret doing so now. If entrepreneurship was really, if education was really killing their entrepreneurial abilities, then they would have all been successful entrepreneurs by now, right? So this brings me to what Niladri pointed out. If education was really killing entrepreneurship, then the uneducated have the highest chances of being entrepreneurs. And India, being home to millions of uneducated people, should see hundreds, if not thousands of entrepreneurs. Do we see that happening? No. You may not need a specialization, you may not need a college degree, but you definitely need a basic level of education on which you build the foundation of your life. Even an entrepreneur needs to know how to read, to write, and more importantly, how to think. Education is a privilege, members of the House. You and I, in this auditorium today, are privileged. There are millions of people in this very country who are not as privileged as we are. Therefore, do you see how dangerous it is when the proposition keeps repeating that education is not necessary and in fact it kills entrepreneurship? We need to spread education, members of the House, not propagate the idea that education stops you from becoming who you want to be. It's a statement that's very irresponsible and which is not only harmful to the society at large, but will eventually be harmful to entrepreneurs as well.
We'll go on to the next speaker, who is Sunny Bean from Toronto University, speaking for the motion.
There are plenty of entrepreneurs in India. The men selling fruit outside on the streets, the markets, those are entrepreneurs. They're creating businesses. And while they aren't the ideal entrepreneur that this motion intends, they nevertheless qualify as starting a new venture. Whether they are rich or poor, by definition, they are entrepreneurs, and they are the people creating their own businesses. The last point I'd like to address was a question from the audience, which said that people can't create these businesses if they don't know about the subjects. And rather, we agree that they need a baseline. We believe that they need to learn how to spell, as it was simplistically put in the beginning of the case, and there's no refutation of that. Rather, we believe that the ending, and when they have this idea, and when it's ready to take off, it's suffocating to be stuck in a classroom and to be stuck in the same motions over and over, of which they've already reached that point. Next, I'd like to move on to the idea of time constraints, and that youth, which are historically a destabilizing group body of individuals, are stuck in the classroom when rather they could be creating. The first thing we'd like to talk about with time is the amount of sheer energy that goes into schooling, the number of hours that goes into homework when they are finished. The average Indian student spends 25 hours, who is in school, doing homework each week. And they're doing subjects such as geology and history, classes that are important, but nevertheless not necessarily for entrepreneurship. The side opposition presented an example of somebody who wanted to create a video game, and yet he was stuck, instead he needs to learn that algebra. Rather, we believe, yes, this is the time period in which people are thinking of this, in which kids are creative enough to be creating these video games. The sheer amount of time that parents and teachers put into pressuring students to be doing homework and to be in the classroom, when people are not studying and when they're at home and bored, this is the time that creativity takes off. But instead there is this pressure and this underlying time that instead it needs to be devoted into future classroom activities, into future homework. This parental encouragement to study and this generational effect instead takes away. Instead, during this most creative years, there's this expectation that they need to be working harder, that entrepreneurial ventures are a distraction. This idea that it's a distraction plays in, and it creates a mindset that there is time later in life, instead seen as a waste of time. This is the time in which they are not afraid to take these risks, and instead they're stuck in a classroom. They're stuck behind books. They're stuck learning what might otherwise have been time that they would have gone into creating. We need boredom to have this time to think, and to think for yourself, and to become creative.
We'll go on to the next speaker. Speaking against the motion, the penultimate speaker from that side, from Christ University, Bangalore, Akanksha Pal.
I would start off by saying that the aversion to education on side proposition has made them misread the motion in itself. The motion, ladies and gentlemen, reads that education kills entrepreneurship, not formal education. So what they've actually done is presented to you an extremely myopic view of what education is. Education, ladies and gentlemen, goes beyond classrooms. It goes beyond the textbooks. Education is experience. Education is what you learn on an everyday basis. Taking the example of Mark Zuckerberg himself, they came here and told you of how Mark Zuckerberg could learn programming and coding from a friend. The fact that he is learning programming and coding is education in itself, ladies and gentlemen, and hence the entire characterization falls. Moving on to my second basic problem with their definition of entrepreneurship is, they've come and spoken to you and they have painted this picture of an entrepreneur on some miracle drug. They've told you about how an entrepreneur is someone who doesn't follow norms, is someone who doesn't follow rules. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not an entrepreneur. That's a criminal on some hit list. Third of all, ladies and gentlemen, the side proposition has come here and has failed to distinguish between what education policy is and what the notion of education is in itself. Let's take the look of the fundamental right of speech and expression, which we unfortunately enjoy or don't enjoy in this country. For example, Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India talks about the fact that we all have the freedom of speech and expression. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is a joke. So would you talk about the implementation of the right or criticize the right in itself and say, you know what, we don't want the right? Ladies and gentlemen, the problem is with the policy of education and the way education is being implemented, not the notion of education in itself. Fourth of all, ladies and gentlemen, they have come here and told you how students spend a lot of time learning subjects which they don't even need in the future. The problem in this contention is, if they don't know the subjects which they're interested in, how will they ever know that they can build on those subjects and capitalize on them in the first place? Moving on to my first contention would be A, that education and entrepreneurship are not two exclusive things. Ladies and gentlemen, one flows to the other. Even the most creative people on the planet, which are scholars and artisans, go to art school. Now, what does education do, ladies and gentlemen? It helps in organizing creativity. A person who's good in painting and only has a limited knowledge of, say, watercoloring will only be able to capitalize on that particular genre of art. What if he's good even at oil painting? Now, the notion of learning oil painting can only come if he's educated and has particular skills and talent, ladies and gentlemen. Moreover, there's a reason why students from prestigious universities and colleges have certain skill set which enable them to become big entrepreneurs. Not everybody on the street can become an entrepreneur, ladies and gentlemen. Side proposition has come here and told you about the roadside vendors who are entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a difference between the roadside thelawalas and the person who is Mark Zuckerberg sitting and earning millions of dollars in America, ladies and gentlemen. All creations are in two parts. A, creativity and skill, and second, technical knowledge. And this technical knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, is only given by education. You need to know the skills of business. You need to know whether your products will be marketable, ladies and gentlemen. You need to know whether your business can be workable in a particular area. And for this, ladies and gentlemen, you need to know the knowledge, the history of the area, the demographics of the area, the geography of the area. And only when you have these knowledge and skill sets can you go on to build a multi-dollar industry, ladies and gentlemen.
Last speaker for the motion, speaking on behalf of St. Xavier's College, Advika Jalan.
We have never denied that education is necessary. Of course you need to be literate. Of course you need to have fundamental knowledge. But this is where the spirit of the motion comes into play. When we as side proposition contend that there's a difference between those having the 9-to-5 jobs and those who are entrepreneurs, that to be a successful entrepreneur, it's not just important to have the technical knowledge that, the notions of coding, physics, and every other subject that you need to know. It's also extremely important to have that sort of creativity. And that creativity is what distinguishes these entrepreneurs from the 9-to-5 job holders, because it is this creativity that fuels our society. It is this creativity that makes these entrepreneurs the movers and shakers that they are today. And I'm going to talk to you about how our current educational framework has stamped it out. But before I get into that, side opposition has confused two different words, which are education and learning. We have not made a mistake in our definition when we said that education refers to any formal source of imparting knowledge and skills, whereas learning is something which is intrinsic. It's your inner desire to acquire knowledge and skills, and hence the two are highly distinct entities that you cannot confuse education with learning. Now, I'll tell you how this kills creativity. I hope Father Principal doesn't mind this, but today I am representing my college. If I make a mistake in my debate speech, I'm sure that's the end of my debating career. Because we as a society stigmatize mistakes. We don't give choices. And this sort of ideology is hurting entrepreneurs, because if you cannot have that freedom to make mistakes and learn from them, you will never be able to implement your creative ideas. And what's more important to note is that this sort of fear of failure stems from the intense competition we've created within our system. Now, I see that there are lots of, parents here as well, and you surely must have noticed how difficult it was getting your child admission into a good school. That is such a difficult process, because competition begins right from the time your child is 3 years old, and that competition is what we do. We're so busy trying to compete with each other that we never think about collaborating with each other. And as an entrepreneur, you will realize that what is most important to you is your ability to collaborate with other people. Like a member of the audience rightly pointed out, that entrepreneurship is not just a one-man show. You need a team, and for that, you need to be able to collaborate. But then, what has our educational system taught us? It has told us that, no, it is important for you to beat the rest, to proclaim yourself as the best, to really succeed in life. Whereas, you have just not realized that by collaborating with others, that your entrepreneurship, your startup will only succeed if you have a team, and that you treat others as equals. And these are things I have learned as a result of my learning and not as a result of my education.
Do you know which is the one exam that I had to appear in that I still have nightmares about? It was the exam when, on my son's first birthday, I had to take him for an exam, oral exam, to get admission into a nursery school. This is the first time I was ever giving an exam in my life where I had no control over the answers whatsoever. In fact, the first day, he howled so much he refused to go into the principal's office. And the principal looked at me and my wife and said, "Please make sure you tell your son to behave better and come back next day." On his first birthday. We took out the forms, in fact, for admission when he was 6 months old. I'm now told in this nursery school they give forms with the pregnancy tests itself. Last speaker, speaking against the motion, representing the London School of Economics, Catherine Craven.
I'd like to start by quoting George Orwell. He wrote, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. He obviously refers to the notion that animals, or humans as the metaphor intends to be read as, have the same capacity to achieve their potential, but that this is in fact a fallacy. Agency, the agency to be creative, to be a brilliant individual, does not exist in a vacuum. Structures matter, opportunities are affected by them. Not everyone in the world is in a position to take opportunities, to make the most of the opportunities that are presented to them. Factors that impede upon an individual, a brilliant individual even, taking these opportunities are income, race, gender. I think my case again has been made for me if we look at Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Mark Zuckerberg. What do they all have in common? They are white males. Yeah, I think my case has been made pretty easy if we look at it this way. So factors like income, race, gender that impede upon a direct kind of causal path from an opportunity structure to actually tapping the brilliance of the individual. These factors stand in the way of an individual becoming an entrepreneur or even gaining life experience. And I think this is the most important point that I want to make, that formalized education even tries to remedy this. Bureaucracy, professionalization, formalization, as tedious as they may seem, are actually great equalizers. That is what they are intended to do.
The debate is all about neurosurgery. Because the proposition wants to tell us that the brain has a fixed hard disk. The brain is a fixed hard disk. You have a limited amount of space. You're stuffing it with too much knowledge that is unnecessary. You have no more space in that hard disk to experiment, experience, learn, and do something fantastic. The opposition has been telling us all is well with that hard disk, but to make that hard disk work, you first need to have an operating system. If you don't have an operating system, the best hard disk cannot be put to use. And I think that really sums up the arguments that we've heard from both sides of the floor.